We're back here on our program, Jones and Company, and speaking with Brian Jones today, a money man, one of the money men in the Bahamas, eh? He is managing director of Leno, and Leno is the manager of the fund that is promoting the sale of shares in Bahamas Petroleum Company. How are you going about it, you say? You're inviting people with a net worth of $1 million?
Well, yes. So basically, we've launched the fund as of January 6th, and it's a professional fund in its current form.
Okay.
All right. So it's a professional fund. It can only be sold to professional investors. So those are institutional investors. So like other funds, right, that are in the industry already can qualify, trusts, companies, etc. Any entity that's owned by a professional investor, right? Now, to be clear, a professional investor, as an individual, you don't have to have a net worth of $1 million per se, right? That's one of the criteria. Another option is to actually meet the income criteria.
Okay.
So if you have $300,000 annual income on your own, or about $250 annual income on your own, or $300,000 with your spouse, you qualify as a professional investor.
Okay.
Now, on that point, though, BPC, Bahamas Petroleum Company, they really want to open the fund to the broadest grouping of Bahamians possible, right, to the general public. And so to that end, we've actually applied for a standard fund license that would allow us to open it up.
Through the Securities Commission?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's right.
Tell me, how viable is this whole thing about oil in the Bahamas? I've read some information. There's been some drilling, some testings, and I believe that the rig was somewhere between Andros and Cuba. Yes? How viable is Bahamas Petroleum Company?
Well, in terms of its viability, it's already really been endorsed by the capital markets in London. Okay, so I think that should be an attestation to its viability. So they've been listed for a number of years, but last year, after they received the licenses from the government, they received 4 licenses to drill in different areas in the Bahamas. They then went back to capital markets and were successfully able to raise 26 million pounds on the alternative investment market of the London Stock Exchange. And this is after they've already spent $100 million of shareholders' capital previously doing the testing and other preparations, analysis that needed to be done in order to make the project viable. I mean, there's evidence that there is oil in the Bahamas. Every, I think, oil expedition that was done over the several decades, they struck oil.
In what quantity, though?
Right, so that's the issue, right? So you don't know until you actually get down there and do the drilling, right? So I think there's evidence that there's oil in the Bahamas. There's evidence that there's oil in the region where they're going to drill, because Cuba is drilling oil right there, off to the west. To the northeast, you have oil rigs in Florida, the entire Gulf of Mexico. I understand there's over 10,000 oil rigs there. So in terms of viability, the project, it compares favorably to others that have been successful in the past. If you look at, for example, the feasibility of the drilling, the depth of the water is a fraction of what they're drilling in the Gulf. So I understand it's a very moderate depth with the site that they've located. So that should actually increase the efficiency of the operation, right?
Mr. Jones, this is a long-term investment, right? I mean, this oil exploration is a long-term investment.
Well, I would say any early stage company, if you look to invest in an early stage company, you should look at the long term.
But my reason for that question is
yes.
this, right? We live in this era of climate change. I mean, also, as a result of that, there's the view that fossil fuel has exacerbated the instability of the climate.
That's correct.
Right? And countries are leaning towards clean energy. In that environment, does this operation, what is the future of this operation?
Right. So in terms of the demand for crude oil into the future, I mean, I think it will ultimately, decline, right, based on the other factors, right, alternative energy sources, right. I don't claim to be an expert in energy or in oil production either, but I mean, currently the demand is still rising, if I'm not mistaken, right. I don't think we've hit that tipping point yet. And by the time the well becomes, let's just say, if they do strike oil, in order to get to the period where the company actually is turning a profit, we're still looking at approximately 5 years into the future. So a lot of things can happen between now and then, but what normally happens is one of the big players, like a Shell or Exxon, would step in. They'd step in and either lease or take over the project in one way or the other, right? BPC is an oil exploration company. So once they drill this well and do the drill plan, they're going to move on to drilling another, right? Continue what they do is exploration, and a big oil production company will come in and actually manage the process. So I would say yes, it's a long-term play, but currently the price of the shares is at 2 pence, right? So in the short term, you can see significant price action on the stock if there is any positive developments.
So Brian Jones, I have $100,000 I want to invest. Why should I put it in Bahamas Petroleum Company?
Well, I would say if you're willing to take some risk with that capital, then you have a good chance.
Would I see a depreciation in my investment?
There's potentially a binary outcome. That means it can go parabolically high and be very profitable, right? That's generally what happens if there's a huge find, which is what they're anticipating. They're anticipating, I think, something like 1.5 billion barrels. Yeah. Okay. But if anything goes wrong along the way, right? If there's no oil discovered, or if it's deemed to be, let's say, non-commercially viable for any reason, then it can go to zero. Right, so you're dealing with two extremes. So it's not the type of investment where you bet your retirement savings.
And there's no guarantee.
Yeah.
You're offering no guarantees at all.
No, and you don't go all in on this type of high risk investment. This is for somebody who's looking to diversify. Let's just say a portfolio of government bonds or local equities where there isn't a huge potential for either capital appreciation or income, right? So these types of more risky investments are good to put as a small component of an overall portfolio, because if you then lose, your impact is a kind of diverse. Yeah, it's minimal. It's diversified in that sense. But if you actually if it turns out to be a positive outcome, it could really boost your overall returns for the portfolio.
As a fund manager, would you put yourself on the line to suggest that it is a good investment?
We cannot actually endorse the investment.
We cannot.
Well, the thing is, we want to be remain neutral in the sense that, as an administrator of the fund, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the investors to always act in their best interest. And if we see anything going on with the fund that is untoward or essentially has a negative impact on valuation, we don't want to be caught in the middle. We want to be able to remain transparent and neutral, right? So we take that stance from the beginning that we're happy to work with them as clients because we know that they've done their homework, right? That's clear. We've taken painstaking efforts with them to ensure that all of the risks, the intrinsic risks to this type of investment, but as well as the general risks to this type of industry, were fully disclosed in the offering memorandum so that investors can actually analyze and make their own risk assessment. But yesterday, we actually hosted a professional investor showcase in which the CEO of BPC was there himself, and people were able to hear directly from the source a clear endorsement for the project, right? And he laid out a lot of his rationale as to why he thought they would, for certain fine oil, it was only a question as to whether it would be a teacup or, you know, a tanker full, right? So that's really the main issue. The science speaks to the fact that there is oil, and the only way to now determine what the valuation of that is to go down there and do the rest of the work, right? And so doing the rest of the work entails an initial discovery well and several other wells that would help them calculate the overall volume of the find.
So they've drilled in 4 areas, you say?
They will, sorry.
Or they have
No,
drilled?
they have 4 licenses.
4 licenses.
And they're starting one right now.
I see. And the one they're starting is in the southeast Bahamas?
Right, it's near Key Sal. And it's just against the maritime border with Cuba.
Okay. All right. And when would your prospectus be available?
It's available on our website right now for a professional fund. And we just earlier this week on Wednesday submitted the application to the Securities Commission for the standard fund license. So that will run its course. We cannot be certain as to when we'll receive feedback on that. But the regulator, they're carrying out their process. And as soon as, if we have the chance to open the fund to retail investors, we're going to definitely make that known. But for the time being, the professional fund closes February 7th.
So are there any plans, Mr. Jones? Let's be positive. Let's say they do find oil in commercial quantities. All right? Are there any plans to do any refining so that some of that wealth would stay in the Bahamas rather than sending the crude to someplace else to be refined? Because that happens too much in developing countries, you know.
Well, it's up to the government, right? So the government will receive royalties. So they'll receive their share of all revenue earned, all profits earned at BPC. And it's up to the government to determine what they do with that. So for example, I understand that the government has the option of receiving oil or cash.
See, in this region, Mr. Jones, these governments are cash starved, all right? And anytime they can get their hands on cash, because most of the governments in this country run a deficit economies, all right? And so the investor is always in the driver's seat, all right? Because our governments, not only in the Bahamas, throughout the region, always seem to be cap in hand, all right? And they don't look at the long term. That is why I ask you, if all you're concerned about is taking the crude and sending it to someplace else, or there being interested in developing a refinery, so you get the byproduct.
See, that is definitely a question for the government, because they have the ability to take the oil and sell it to a refinery to have it refined right here, or they can take the cash. So, and to that point though, if there's a positive oil discovery, right, and the drill plant is approved, right, so that we know that, okay, this is going to be a viable production well. There's a 30-year window, right, for pulling up oil, right? Yeah. Okay, so during that time frame, there's enough room for a lot of things.
New regulations and all that.
Correct. Correct. That's right.
Ryan Jones, this is a good in terms of investing in the Bahamas. The environment right now is a good one?
I'd say yes, in the sense that the Bahamas has always been politically stable. So even though we see shifts in government, there's no mega policy shifts that would deter international investment or general capital activity. We'd like to see more policy that stimulates, but ultimately we don't see general disruption. So I'd say that's a baseline. Secondly, we already highlight the fact that there's a huge investment gap, right? So there's a lot of not only investors seeking to deploy capital, right, but they lack opportunities. There's also a whole lot of entrepreneurs that are seeking funding, right? And they're underfunded or can't find this funding. So there's a gap. So we need to connect all the players in the industry. And to that point, I'd like to highlight another interesting, innovative development in our capital markets. There is a crowdfunding platform that is actually coming on stream. And that is their exact objective, and their goal and objective is to connect underfunded entrepreneurs that actually cut the mustard, right? That have been vetted, their business plans have been vetted, they've received different coaching, they might even already have a certain backer, right? But they just don't necessarily have all the capital they need to make their business viable. They can go to the crowd and be funded.
Mr. Jones, you interface with investors all the time. I guess you probably interface with all sorts of investors, right?
Yes.
What about this reputation the Bahamas has regarding the difficulty in doing business, this ease of doing business? What red flag does that raise to some of the people that you speak to?
Well, I can tell you, yeah, it's not easy to do business, and we understand that there's a number of initiatives underway to ease, to ease you know, the plight of doing business in the Bahamas, right? But it is a big inhibitor. It is. You know, the fact that you have to go to so many different offices, and there's just a lot of red tape. And essentially, even if the process was clear, right? Because you find out after you go to one place that you need to go someplace else, etc. So there's no real centralized place for doing business.
And you know, from Ingram's time, we've been talking about one stop.
Yep.
And investing.
If I may draw a little parallel to kind of highlight how things could be, right? Yeah. So if you look at a very
before you continue that, do you see things improving in terms of ease of doing business? You see, because as Godfrey and you said, we heard about one-stop shop for 2 decades.
Yes.
Do you see as you don't? No. So specifically in my field, I run into friction all the time.
Yeah.
You know, I won't make any comments. There's friction at almost every step of the way, right? I can't say that you know, it's not that people don't have the will. Though I think the will is there, right? But we have to be a bit more systematic in how we do things. There needs to be a big investment in technology so that there's more transparency in how things are conducted, how business is conducted, approvals, right? So that people are served in turn, right? First come, first serve, right? Everyone pays the same amount, you know, and so on. So you want to have a reputation as a jurisdiction that was conducive to doing business, right? And we don't have that, right? I've had a client tell me recently that I'm the first Bahamian that they've met, and they've been doing business in, you know, for years in the Bahamas, that who doesn't operate on island time. So that's a serious thing.
You know, but what the government expects, the expectation of the government from investors, whether local or foreign, just seem to be unrealistic. The tax structure, for instance, is cumbersome. And all of this, I believe, nears to the stagnation that we see in the economy of the Bahamas.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So kind of going back to you know, the crowdfunding platform, because I think it's an excellent example to highlight how it removes a lot of the friction that we see from the investor side, from the regulator side, and also from the entrepreneurs themselves, right?
Yes, we need to break up the bureaucratic arrangements that we have in the country. There's too much bureaucracy, and I believe that we have too much bureaucracy because I believe that politicians are too meddlesome.
You see, and so if you move to a systematic approach where essentially if all criteria are met, and the conditions are met systematically, then you should be approved. It shouldn't be subjective to who you are or who you know or whatever the case may be, right? So this is why technology is actually a driver for efficiency, because we're talking about having a more efficient system, right? Where things are documented on paper and walked around and signed off here and there, you can't keep track, right? You can't keep track, and signatures even can be forged, and all kind of, there's too much room for error, right? But if you upload, for example, all the documentation for a particular, let's just say a company wants to raise some money. Let me just tell you a bit about Arawak X so you can understand how it comes together. So the company's called Arawak X. It's trading under the name M Dollars, and they're on the verge of being authorized by the Securities Commission as a crowdfunding platform, okay? And in this regard, they seek to connect those entrepreneurs with the sources of capital, right? So they're a bridge for that. What they would do, they would vet the entrepreneurs, first of all. So if you see a company on their platform, you already know that they're legit. They're properly structured, right? That their firm meets certain minimum standards when it comes to best practices, governance standards, and the like. So you already have someone somewhat vouching for the company, not necessarily vouching for the viability or the profitability of the company, but you have some independent professional firm saying they're well structured. They have the right, they have all the ingredients to be successful, and now what they need is some capital to now take them over the finish line, right? So you have that process to make sure that they meet a certain standard. Once they're on there, you can't just take money from any and everyone off the street, right? So there has to be a vetting process as well for any investors who want to fund these projects. Now, any company coming onto the platform would have to need at least a minimum of $50,000 or a maximum of $3 million. Otherwise, it wouldn't be viable for them to come onto the platform, right? You need some level of scale in order to make this make sense. And this is good because we're talking about small and medium-sized businesses that can grow up one day to be big businesses, right? So they can come onto the platform already thinking big. So the investors come on, they're vetted, basic KYC, et cetera, is all uploaded electronically, vetted by human beings in the background, right? So you still have a human touch, right? So people can apply common sense, right? Artificial intelligence, it's getting smarter and smarter, but you still need to apply common sense to make sure that you're not financing terrorists, that you're not laundering money, right? But once those key risks have been mitigated, then the investors are white labeled, right? They're white listed, and they're able to then contribute to any company that's on the platform. So if we then can now start unlocking some of the savings or reversing some of the unnecessary consumption activity we're seeing, right? People spend too much money. We have a consumption-based society. So if we get people to say, okay, instead of spending money on that extra pair of shoes or whatever the case may be, they can now start investing, right? And seeing their money work for them. And I think that's what you were talking about, yeah. Right?
Mr.
Having
Jones,
your money work for you.
Another question. On our program, one point.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We've spoken about the fact that the 10 most vibrant economies in the world, 7 of them are in Africa.
Mm.
All right?
Yeah.
I know in your field, you must have some idea. What are countries like Rwanda doing that we should be doing in order to move our economy from 1% annual growth rate, or maybe they make a big deal we make a big deal out of everything around here, right? Mm-hmm. Any incremental increase, we make a big deal of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
As with this tourism thing, right? We make a big deal out of anything, all right? Whereas we have the potential, like in those African countries, mm-hmm. to be at 5 or 6% growth rate, right? But we're at 1, and if you go to 2, that's a big deal, all right? What are they doing that we aren't doing to get our economy moving?
Well, there's a number of things. So you mentioned Rwanda specifically.
Yes.
So Rwanda, like Uganda, its neighbor, they are actually at the epicenter of digital innovation in Africa, okay, along with Kenya, okay, and Nairobi.
And Ghana.
And Ghana as well.
Yeah.
But Rwanda and Uganda are the first movers from actually being strategic about putting technology at the core of their growth strategy, right? So they actually developed a number of incubation centers and hubs, and they've passed legislation already to encourage this type of innovation, right? But beyond that, what started to really drive this innovation was M-Pesa. So you may be familiar with M-Pesa, which operates broadly in Africa. It's a telecoms company whereby essentially
Mozambique.
you can actually transfer money phone to phone using the SMS messages. Okay. All right. So because Africa had so many unbanked individuals, so they had no access. In fact, there's so many Africans living in the rural areas. As they started to develop without landlines. They'd never received landlines. They went straight to cell phones. So that's what we call leapfrogging. I want to talk about leapfrogging. So leapfrogging is where you basically, as a society or as a country, you actually jump. You bypass certain technological trends, right? So they never had landlines in many regions, so they went straight to cell phones. They have no banks. Their phone is their bank. You see?
But they have a lot of people as well.
They have a lot of people as well.
We don't have a lot of people.
But what
We get a lot of money here.
Correct. So let me just kind of give you a quick little anecdote that I read. This is about a Westerner years ago. This thing a decade ago. All right, 2010, on safari in Africa. Okay, and you know, he's out there taking photos and, you know, having a great time. He comes across a tribesman, right, and he's carving up these amazing masks, right, and he's like, wow, I really want this mask to take and put on top of my mantle, right? How much is it? And the guy, you know, told him, and he said, oh no, I don't have enough cash on me. And you know what the old man said to this sophisticated Westerner? Cash? Who uses cash anymore anyway? You can pay me on my phone. You see, and that's the reality of Africa right now, right? Whereas here it is, you know, we're talking about sand dollar at the central bank. You know, they're creating a digital dollar, and we'll all be transacting, you know, phone to phone using our digital wallets in our phone. It's now a reality in pilot stage, right, in Exuma. But again, this is now 7 years later, right, after Africa. This is normal. 90% of all their transactions, or more than 90% of all their transactions, you know, in Kenya, for example, for sure, are done on M-Pesa, and now there's other competing platforms. So for example, now you have cryptocurrency as a trend. For them, it's not a foreign thing. It's not a strange thing to say, to use digital money, right? So it's just a new iteration on top of what they already had before.
So we have to be more innovative. That's
Absolutely.
the bottom line.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Brian Jones, for being here today. You have to come to be with us more often.
I agree.
It's quite an education.
I would say people like Brian, you know, tells me there's hope.
Absolutely.
There's hope.
Yeah.
There's hope for this next generation of professionals that we have.
And we do have a number of young Bahamians like
we do.
Brian.
We do.
And we have engaged some of them. And what we need to do, Brian, and perhaps you can, I'm going to say to you on radio and television, organize a group of young people so that we can get around the table and exchange some ideas.
Okay.
And see if we can move the country forward.
Oh, yes.
Let's do that.
Okay?
Very soon.
All right. Thank you so very much for being here today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Godfrey Innes.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching and listening to our program. Good evening, everyone.